It's been a long week at Emory and Henry College. Many of you may know that. And my 8-year-old earlier this week shared her cold with me. We're both doing much better, but I hope this is okay. Before we get started this morning, I would like to offer a few disclaimers, not the disclaimers I just asked. I guess this is the second wave of disclaimers. Wava, my personal muse of UU Speaking Opportunities, asked me to speak about what she perceived of as my life as an activist mother. I don't know that I live up to that title, but I do know that I can't do this morning without fully embracing my personal perspectives and just fully showing my political bias, right? So where maybe your Friday event did not involve some politics, I'm asking for your permission to go ahead and let me do that this morning a little bit. I am very, very careful in my identity as a college professor to not do that. I stand in my college classroom very carefully hewing a very neutral space to keep that a safe space for my students, but I don't know how to talk about my life as an activist parent while trying to remain neutral. So I hope I don't offend anyone, but I decided it would be better just to be really honest about all this rather than try to walk that line. I also want to note that the way I go about this that I'm speaking about this morning is very much a matter of personal choice. And I am not in any way trying to critique any fellow parents in the room and beyond who choose to raise their children as they choose to raise their children. This is not meant to be another battle in the so-called mommy wars to prove who can be the better parent. It's not that. Okay. So, disclaimers aside, here we go. This is Darla. Darla came from Cracker Barrel, of all places to begin a conversation about activism in the modern world. I know Cracker Barrel does not have the best social justice record, but one of the first lessons I've learned of activist parenting is I am not perfect, and sometimes my girls and I end up there. They have really good pancakes, and Lottie likes them. Darla is a stuffy from the impulse section near the checkout. Twyla talked me into her one summer day, and Darla was immediately loved and was named from the back seat soon after her purchase. Darla's purchase. Mom, this tag says Darla's real name is Puck. Is Puck a girl's name or a boy's name? Well, Puck is traditionally a boy's name. Theater professor in me wants to tell her all about Puck, the fairy child from Midsummer Night's Dream. Child of the 90s, I want to talk about Puck, the villain on that one season of The Real World. Thank you, Mark. But, yeah, Puck is traditionally a boy's name. But, Mom, Darla is a girl. Isn't there a word for someone who's born as one gender, but then later learns they really are another gender? And in that moment, in my Volvo, I try to navigate all of the language we as parents have to do. Darla, the panda, who is now known as the panda who also happens to be transgendered, became a beloved part of our family. Just a day in the life of the modern-day parent. Never in my life have I been more conscious of my own political identity than when I navigate questions of parenthood. I am reminded daily of the battle cry of second-wave feminism, the personal is political. Now, there are many ways to interpret this statement, and many scholars brighter than me have done so, but I think of this statement as a way to think about the way my personal experiences, my personal perspectives, my lived experiences on things like sex, childcare, abortion, the division of household labor, those are not merely, in my eyes, personal issues, but the way I navigate those issues carry political importance, activist importance. And I believe that the way that we navigate our individual choices must be seen as potentially activist. And until we see it that way, we have no real way to organize against patriarchal oppression. And I find it impossible in the 21st century to not see the very way that I parent, the very way that I model my own gendered story, my whiteness, my own sexuality, my own sense of class structure, etc., these things have real political ramifications, both in how I teach my daughters to navigate the world, but also in what it means for others who watch me navigate this world, such as my students, my colleagues, etc. It means something for them to watch me navigate the professional world, for example, as a mother. The very path I hew for this world has significance whether I like it or not, whether I want it or not. As a career-focused PhD, artist, and mother, I am my own version of a walking billboard. The way I balance between work and life means something. The fact that people call me doctor and mom means something. After all, you can't be what you can't see. Activism is deeply personal. This is a scary world right now, and while I would love to shelter my girls from much of it, I don't think it's ethical for me to do so. Not now. Not when we are challenged, so challenged as we currently are with injustices in the world. The morning after I learned Trump was elected, like many of you, I wept. And I wept, and I wept. I wept for days. And in those days, I got told to stop by a number of people. I got told to accept. I got told to move on by a lot of people. And again, I don't mean to offend anyone, but I need to let you know that 100% of the people who told me to stop weeping were white, straight, and male. And even from my own position of relative privilege, I remember that feeling of being diminished and dismissed. And I can't help but remember to this day what that felt like. And what perhaps folks didn't understand is that I did not weep because we had lost, but I wept because I was afraid. And I'd like to tell you, as a well-educated intersectional feminist, that I want to tell you that I wept for a larger systemic fear, especially for those that are the most vulnerable in our society, to the kinds of politics that I feared would be enacted by this man and his party. But what really got to me those days after the election was a very personal fear for what this meant for my daughters, for what the election of this man means specifically for my daughters. But activism can't just be about what I want for my children. It must be about what we want for all of our children. There was a lot of social media activity post-election, and one vein of posts that really hit me called me on this very thing. It was the posts about, and maybe some of you saw them, the posts about how white mothers were just waking up to understand the fear black mothers have had for their children for years. And where had I been? Now I understood maybe a fraction of that fear. Being an activist parent means I need to do better. Activism is a long game. Many of my fears as they relate to my daughters come down to a toxic masculinity and a rise of misogyny. Right now, no doubt, Donald Trump's photo hangs in Meadowview Elementary right down the road where my 8-year-old attends 3rd grade. Right now, the boys she goes to school with walk by that photo every day, and they learn that you can objectify, abuse, and assault women, and not only get away with it, but you can become president of the United States. The real consequences of this were played out this week as we watched Dr. Ford get destroyed in the public sphere, while the smug face of Brett Kavanaugh and others around him so easily claim she's lying. And even if she isn't, that it shouldn't matter. Boys will be boys. It was so long ago. Locker room talk. Sitting around a table just the other night with the Finneys, we talked about how do we raise our daughters to know? How do we raise our daughters to know they have a voice with this going on in the background? Dr. Ford and her family now live in protective custody because of the death threat she has received for speaking her truth. How do we make sure our daughters, who are being raised with boys and girls walking by an image of a known misogynist in their school, learn to challenge this world? But what I may be less comfortable with is talking to them about how I confront my own feelings of voicelessness. How do I come to peace with the many times I should have been braver but wasn't? Is it activist parenting to talk to my girls about those vulnerabilities, about those flaws, about my own past with assault and workplace discrimination, but especially maybe about the deep regrets I have about how I've handled some of that. Activist parenting is vulnerable. If the personal is indeed political, we have to think as parents about how our children watch us navigating the world. And on a deeply personal note, it wasn't until I really understood this that I could choose to end my marriage. It wasn't until I really understood what I was teaching my daughters about gender politics and what it meant to be in a loving, respectful relationship that I could find that courage. And I don't say this to bash my ex. In fact, I think in this moment they learned a lot from the both of us. Activism is about the way I model my life for my girls. Activism is about the way that I model it is good to have professional aspirations, even as I am a committed mother. I am modeling for them choice in these moments. Activism is about little moments like Darla, the transgendered panda, and what is and is not appropriate in a Halloween costume, and more importantly, why certain costumes might be racially offensive. Activism is choosing when and when not to say something when religious materials come home from school, and knowing that my girls are watching as I make those decisions. Aside from these deeply personal moments, and I think that activism in the form of parenting comes at least in those two different ways, the very personal ways we navigate the world, but also some more public ways one might choose to navigate the world. So for me, some of that has meant participating in marches. Since I have arrived here, I've attended the MLK marches organized by APEC every year with my children. Sometimes this meant a stroller and or a child on my back. And other times this has meant my girls get pushed to the front to lead the pack so that when the photo is taken, my girls and I end up on the cover of newspapers. More on that in a moment. My girls and I have also attended the Women's March this past January in Johnson City, the March for Gun Reform after the Florida shootings organized by many of the young people in this very church, and the most recent Pride Parade in Johnson City. In each of these cases, I sat my girls down and tried to find developmentally appropriate language to tell them why I believed we should all attend. I told them if they'd like to go, I would help them make a sign, and I would try to help them find the right words for their feelings on the matter. Making signs with children is its own challenge. I've got some for you today. I helped my girls make signs for the Women's March, and it was so rewarding to help them work through their feelings about what they know about the oppression of women. My girls are 8 and 10 years old for perspective, so I guess they were 7 and 9 last year when we did this. At first, and it wasn't just them, they had some friends at the table with me too. They wanted to make signs that said things like, "Down with boys," or "Girls are better than boys." And so I had a moment where I got to be a different kind of activist parent, right? I was able to discuss about ways in which we can use our activism to bring people up rather than pushing others down. To take a moment, I thought it might be fun to share the signs we made on that day after we got over "down with boys" and stuff like that. So I let my girls pick what my sign would say, and this is the sign I held at this march. It says, "Girls should be only 2 things, whoever and whatever they want," right? I let my girls pick that sign. That's what I made. This is Lottie's sign. Again, to read it because it's hard to read. It says, "Girls are cool. Cool enough to be," and she's drawn a picture of a basketball player, a superhero, a president. The president, anyways, that's quite the image. I think we've got Abraham Lincoln in our head more than anything else. Firefighters or cowgirls, right? That's what girls can be. And then we have from Twyla, "Girls rule." And I have a picture of a girl who I don't think is ruling. She's very sad. She seems to have a black eye. You can see the tears coming out of this girl, but no, this girl over here rules, right? That's Twyla's activism. And because my children are also cat obsessed, they also requested that we do the cat protest signs. So again, forgive me if this is too crass for any of you, but, there's mine, right? It's the Women's March. This is our cat, Rita, on a pride flag, which is also Lottie's choice as her name badge here at the UU. If you look at that, it's her cat on a pride flag. Rita, how about Rita grabs back? We'll go with that. Girls and cats rule. Yeah. And also, difference makes you special, not bad. Special is super cool. And we have a rainbow of cats. This is what activism with children looks like. I was looking through the signs they made for the gun reform march that were destroyed by the snow. There was really heavy snow that day, and Twyla's related to, it was a cotton candy tube, and it was like, replace guns with love, which for her meant cotton candy, right? There's something beautiful about the logic of children in these moments, right? That cat sign with the rainbow cats, that's beautiful, right? So moving on from the Women's March and the process that yielded those gems, to think for a second about the gun march. The gun march was trickier for me to take my girls to, and I think the issue was for two different reasons. One, it was really, really hard for me to talk about gun violence with my kids. It was great to talk to my kids about how so many people came out that day because they were thinking about children a lot like them. But it was really, really hard to help them understand the number of children that have been killed in schools because of gun violence, and that's what was pulling people out to the streets. There's a very particular kind of innocence you take away when you talk to your kids about these things. The second reason it was hard for me to take them to that march is because I was scared. I was worried that because of the nature of this issue, that we might draw armed counter-protesters, and I wasn't 100% sure that we were safe to go. In the car on the way to the march, I told my girls that I felt this way. And my friend Alma came with me, and we asked that they always be holding one of our hands. So at all points in time, either Alma or I had one of my girls in our hands. And I told them that if at any point I saw a gun, because there was a rumor that there were going to be open carrying counter-protesters with, licenses and such, but I wasn't comfortable with that. I told them if I saw a gun, that we would head right home. And I asked them to understand if I act quickly that they would need to know why. If you were at this march, you'll know, however, that there weren't any counter-protesters. I guess the snow was a little much for that contingency. But on the way back to the car, I had a really wonderful moment with Twyla, 7 years old. Twyla told me that she was disappointed that there weren't any counter-protesters. And I asked her why. And she told me that she was having a really hard time understanding why anyone would want more guns in this world, and that she really would have liked to talk to one of them to better understand. You got to know, as a parent, I burst with pride on that one. Beautiful. As I researched for this sermon this morning, I read some parents thinking about whether or not it is okay to decide for children if they should go to various marches. I think since the election of Trump, a lot of us have thought about this. To what extent is it okay to involve our children in our political activism? And I think this is a super important question. All I can say is I'm navigating this in the way that it makes sense to me, and I think that other parents may come to different decisions, all of which also make a lot of sense to me. To the best of my ability, I let my children choose. If they choose not to go to something I've asked them to go to, I will find a way to find some childcare if I feel like I need to go, or I'll stay home myself. Navigating being an activist in a world where one often needs childcare is its own sort of particular challenge, but that's another speech, I think. I let them design their own messaging if we go to a protest, with the extent that, I do talk about positive messaging in their activism. We're not going to bring other people down with our messaging, but otherwise, I absolutely have a sign about girls being cowgirls, and basketball players and presidents and cats and all of that. And I think that messaging makes sense to them developmentally, and I think it's important to let them do that. If they don't want to go, I respect it, unless it is about something about like not wanting to walk too far. I get that one sometimes. I don't like to go to marches, Mom, because it's tiring. And I get that one sometimes at the MLK March, and my poor children, they get an earful about how and where we would be if the leaders of the civil rights movement felt like they were tired of walking. And eventually my girls yield to that line of argument. That march I absolutely insist on. I also post and allow other people to post pictures of my kids online at these protests, which I think is also maybe not how everyone else would play this, but I do this for many reasons. I do this mostly as it relates to my sense of rural activism. If we think about social media, the vast majority maybe of my friends beyond this world are in major urban centers of the world. Seattle, New York City, Chicago, LA. I work in the theater, so a lot of my friends are based in major urban centers. And those folks really think they know what life is like in Southwest Virginia. And I am not trying to put on a false image of what it's like here, but I think one of my roles as a rural activist is to make sure that folks outside from here get my view of what it's like to live here. So when they like to reduce our region to way too simplistic stereotypes, I like to offer a snapshot from our little corner of the world as I'm experiencing it. As we wind to the end, the point I think I'm trying to make here is that activist parenting is frankly living in a yes and mentality. Activist parenting is in the small, personal decisions, the very personal moments of how you're going to live your family life, and being conscious of the fact that your children, students, colleagues, community members, etc., are watching. And it's also about the more public ways that you might choose to be an activist. And it's also about the very private ways you unpack that activism in car rides home to or from these various protests. It is about who your children see you inviting into your home as family and friends. It is about who and how you love in this world. And it's also about compromise. Being a mother of two is busy business. And if I demand perfection from myself about where I shop, what I buy, etc., I will self-destruct. And I need to be easy on myself in those moments. Which brings me back to Darla. Most recently, my girls and I made it to the Pride Parade celebration in Johnson City. And as I normally do, I sat my girls down to explain what a Pride event was and why I thought they might enjoy going. And surprisingly, I found my words were absolutely failing me on this day. I mean, I guess we can understand trying to explain gender identity and sexuality to small children is indeed not easy, and I was sort of failing. My girls, however, absolutely picked me up. They started to note all of the amazing people in their lives that they were celebrating at this parade. And Twyla squealed. If you've ever heard Twyla squeal, you know what I'm talking about. It is something. She squealed, she ran upstairs, and she came down with Darla. Mom, this is a parade for Darla. This is a day for us to celebrate my transgendered panda. Yes, baby. Yes, it is. Thank you.